for the gift of your time, folks that are here and the folks that are on Zoom. And let's start this. Let's get this started. We
All
go
right.
a long, long way back. 1989, when I met you, I was a community manager at Columbia Villa, and you were a chef.
That's right.
Quite a
Deputy sheriff, yeah.
deputy chef, yeah.
At the very beginning of my policing career, I had the opportunity to work at the Columbia Villa in North Portland with a community policing team. And Antoinette led the social service providers that worked in Columbia Villa, trying to provide support and resources to the people that live there. And I was one of the young deputies that were trying to keep the peace. And I really learned early in my career the value of engagement with community members and with social service providers, and that together we could have really positive changes on the environment that people lived in, and we could do things that we hadn't done before in policing. And your gift to me was to teach me how to relate to people in our community. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask you, 7 weeks in, why'd you do it? What led you to accept this position? And can you share some of the things that you've learned in this 7 weeks on the job? And what has surprised you the most? I'll stop there.
Well, it's funny that you say it that way, because the first couple of weeks I was at meetings and touring facilities, the staff kept asking me if I was coming back the next day. And that's not to say that it isn't a wonderful organization with a lot of committed people doing everything they can to provide the very best services to the adults in custody. But it's really difficult work. It's challenging. And I'm here because, I failed retirement, to be honest. My wife would tell you, I'm a three-time loser in that sense, that, I left as the chief of police and then a sheriff. And I just felt like I had more to give to our community. And when I received a call from the governor asking if I would be interested in this position, I was intrigued. And I was intrigued because as sheriff running the largest jail system in the state, I saw the profound positive impact we could have on adults in custody and the community, the safety of our community, when we provided resources and we treated people with dignity and respect. And by doing that, we can make sure that they're able to re-enter our communities and be a part of, this neighborhood that we call Portland and Oregon. I also want to say thank you to all of you, as Antoinette did, for being here tonight, to City Club for hosting this important conversation. So Bobby, thank you for reaching out to me.
So Mike, what is your vision for the Department of Corrections, and what are your priorities for this year?
I think I'm on a listening tour right now. I'm trying to meet as many people as I can and to get a sense of this vast organization. As you heard, it is a statewide responsibility. We have prisons all over the state, 12 facilities, plus we run community corrections in 2 of the counties as well. So there's a lot of really good work happening, but it's a vast responsibility, trying to meet as many of the staff, the superintendents, the adults in custody, and have conversations about how I can be of service. I am committed to doing everything possible to provide the rehabilitative services that the adults in custody need to be successful when they leave our custody, because the vast majority will be our neighbors. So we want to make sure that they have the resources to be successful when they leave, and that we lower recidivism, we keep our community safe.
And I believe you've stressed in interviews the need to hire and retain corrections deputies in order to provide the needed rehabilitation to adults in custody. Are you looking at equity issues, including the racial and ethnic diversity of your leadership team and your workforce?
The short answer is yes. We want to mirror the community that we serve, and that community is also the adults in custody. We have overrepresentation throughout our criminal justice system with people of color. That's the same, that's true in DOC. If the Department of Corrections, if you look at who's in custody, I think that we heard a stat that about 25% of the people in custody are people of color. You know, we want our staff to represent that community as well as our leadership team. You know, the challenge I think for us right now, and I think it's true in a lot of public safety agencies, is we don't have enough staff. The pandemic really altered the desire of a lot of young people to be engaged in public safety work. It's hard, it's challenging. We also saw some issues with retention in public safety. A lot of people that were retirement eligible decided that it was time to move on and do something different. So we're struggling right now. We have a lot of vacancies in the Department of Corrections, particularly in two areas. One is corrections officers, and two is our medical support staff. You know, we run little cities. We've got 12 institutions. Each one provides everything that the adults in custody need to live there and work there. And so we have medical staff, we have counselors, we've got educators, we've got recreational specialists, corrections officers. We're hiring. So if you're listening tonight and you're looking for work, it's good paying work and it's meaningful. It's something where you can have a positive impact on our community. And so please consider it.
And I know in our work together in collaboration, we have seen some programs and some models that work. And I want to give an example of one. The Oregon Youth Authority has built a community advisory table with external partners. Do you have a plan to consider something similar to that?
I think that some of that work is already ongoing at Coffee Creek. There was a gender-informed practices assessment that pointed out some of the challenges we have at our women's facility, Coffee Creek in Wilsonville. And one of the things that the staff have already done, and the governor has been supportive, is they've created an advisory council, both with adults in custody, so women that are meeting with our staff and working on solutions to some of the really systemic problems and challenges at Coffee Creek, as well as the governor's advisory council. I think the GIPA, the Gender Informed Practices Assessment, can be a roadmap for how we manage all of our institutions in Oregon as we move forward.
And as we all are aware, there have been some recent concerning media coverage of the conduct of employees. A male nurse at the women's prison convicted federally for sexual abuse of inmates. And I know you can't really go into details specifically, but what do you want the community to know about whether there have been changes in policies or practices that prevent this from happening?
Well, Antoinette, thank you for bringing that up, because that conduct is reprehensible. It doesn't, it puts all of us at risk in public safety. When we have employees that engage in that type of criminal behavior, we need to hold them accountable, which is what happened in this particular situation. That person's going to be spending time incarcerated, and rightfully so. There can be no room in public safety for misconduct, whether it's criminal or whether it's just policy violations. We have to be willing to hold ourselves and each other accountable.
Housing is an issue for everyone. But can you give me maybe an example of how we're all connected, how that affects you and the job that you're doing and the inmates that are there?
You know, one of the governor's priorities is housing, building more housing. One of the challenges that I've heard already from our corrections counselors, we have release counselors that work with all of the adults in custody as they get close to their release date. We're releasing people to unstable housing. A lot of folks, when they get out of our custody, we give them a voucher for a shelter bed. That's not right. That's not a setup for success. We need to make sure that people have stable housing. That's a challenge, I think, for us. You know, community corrections is responsible for providing, once people leave custody, the resources necessary for them to re-enter our communities. But I think we have a responsibility too. And so one of my charges to our staff is, let's make sure we have a plan in place for that first 30 to 60 days when somebody leaves our custody, that we're making sure they have stable housing and employment opportunities if they're able to work.
So does that lack of housing, how does that become a challenge for people being released? and elderly, seniors.
Yeah, I just think it's really hard right now to find housing in our communities. And we release people back to the county where they were convicted. So we want to release people back to the county where they lived before they were incarcerated. But unfortunately, many of those counties, if you think of rural Oregon, they don't have the resources necessary for people coming out of custody necessarily to step into stable housing and employment. So, I think we have to think outside the box. And part of that is being responsive to housing and resources and finding out, what's the best fit and making sure that we are doing everything possible to set up that person for success.
And I know it's only been 7 weeks. You can't solve all the problems today, maybe next month, but I'm just gonna ask you
Yeah.
this. As someone has worked in the community and in public safety for many years, I believe there's a growing societal recognition that we have just too many people in prison. According to the Sentencing Project, Oregon ranks 27th out of 50 states for imprisonment rate, like 100,000 per resident. What do you believe you can do in this position to change our ranking and have less incarceration and also have public safety?
That's a tough question. And I'm going to deflect a little bit because as an appointed official, I don't get to have I can't weigh in on elected responsibilities as I did as an elected sheriff. So I'm learning, to stay in my lane a little bit. So it's tough because our legislature is responsible for some of the sentencing guidelines. We have Measure 11, which was a citizen-led initiative, and those provide the guidance for how long people are going to be in our custody at DOC. So I want to make sure that I am supporting what citizens have done and what our legislators are doing. I will say that, by the time you see people in our custody, a lot of bad outcomes have happened likely in that person's life. There's been a lot of failure in society upstream of the criminal justice system. There's failures in education, there's failures in housing and employment opportunities and in healthcare. And if we're trying to fix all of that when somebody's incarcerated, we're waiting way too long to have a meaningful impact. I'm not saying we don't own it, that we're going to do everything we can to make sure that when people leave our custody, they're successful. But, to look at sentencing from the lens of DOC, really, we've got to move upstream and decide what it is that we want to, what is it as Oregonians we value in terms of our safety and our compassion. It's both. We have to be mindful that many of the people that are in our custody are there because of mental health issues or addiction issues. I was talking to my wife, one of the first things I realized as I was walking through facilities is that it's so different than walking through the situations I find people as a police officer. As a police officer, we often see folks at their very worst. That moment when we're taking them into custody or a victim who's been, somehow hurt in the course of a situation. When I walk into our institutions, I see people that look pretty healthy. We provide a place where people can find sobriety and clarity. Hopefully, we're doing everything we can to help them find meaningful work and educational opportunities while they're in custody. It's not what I expected. It's one of the challenges. I thought we would walk into a place that was more filled with tension, our institutions, and they're really not. A lot of the folks that I see and meet, whether it's adults in custody or staff or program staff, it's a very professional relationship, and it's just different than what I thought it would be. Folks really do, when you give them that opportunity to find sobriety, it is a profound change in their lives. And I think that's one of the things that we can hopefully take when they leave custody and support that as well. Because substance use, disorders are so prevalent in our community. We're struggling right now with fentanyl and, methamphetamine and other drugs that are doing so much damage. If we could find ways to a path for a healthier society, we would have a lot less people incarcerated in our prisons.
And I'd like for you to share a dear friend of mine, Shannon White, has shared with me a great model, I think, the Norwegian model. And I'd like to know, with your leadership, what are your plans to forward that, and where are you at in that? And if you could talk a bit to the audience about what that Norwegian model is.
Yeah, Antoinette was doing a little research and testing me on it earlier. So I was really taken about 2017. I met with some of the staff at the Department of Corrections to talk about this Norwegian trip that they had taken, and they had gone to Norway to study the prison system there. And it was similar in some ways to what was happening in the United States, and they got tired of bad outcomes. And Norway wanted to humanize their prison system, humanize the relationship between the adults in custody and staff, provide the resources and training necessary for the adults in custody to be successful. Oregon sent our leadership team at the Department of Corrections and frontline staff to Norway to study that model, came back and started implementing it here in Oregon. We are in our baby steps of doing that. And, we're two different cultures. Norway is different environment than what we have here in the United States, and different staffing levels too. They have about 3 times the number of staff working in the prisons than we do. So, we're taking baby steps, but what I want to do is make sure that as we look at humanizing the relationship in prison for the adults in custody, the relationship between staff and the adults in custody, making sure that we have the treatment resources necessary for people to be successful. We want to do that across our system, and we want to do that in a very intentional and thoughtful way. That's going to require training for our staff. So I was just talking to our deputy director today about taking this Norway model, the Oregon way, and developing curriculum that we can teach all of our corrections officers at our basic corrections academies, so that it's part of our culture inside our organization as we grow up in the corrections profession.
In this political climate, how do you see your way through or navigate and work with? And thank you, Tina Kotek, for policy and politics, and recognizing that public doesn't always have an appetite for getting more money for those prisoners. How do you see navigating your way through that for this justice reform to follow up on that awesome model in Norway? How are you going to tread?
Wow, how are you going to fix politics? It's not, as a former elected official, politics is not for the faint of heart. I'm going to be very respectful when I talk to our legislators and to the governor's office and to other members of state government. I find people that really are interested in getting things done, making sure that we have the resources and the leadership from the governor's office. She's been very clear that she wants to make things work. And so I value that commitment from her and from our legislators. Having relationships as the chief of police and the sheriff with some of the legislators from the Portland area, I know that they're really interested in how do we provide the treatment resources to the adults in custody, because these are folks that are going to be back in our community and they want them to be successful too. Housing is a big issue, but also mental health and addiction resources. So I think our legislators are going to be supportive of our efforts, because they know that if we don't do good work while folks are incarcerated, then it leads to bad outcomes in our community as well. So I'm hopeful that the relationships that we have and the leadership from the governor's office will help us through that.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to continue, and as we say in the community, keeping it real, and invite someone up to the stage. And sometimes, we're elderly, can I say that? But it's important to be aware of different perspectives. And I'd like to invite someone that I have learned a lot from. And as a community elder, it's important that we take the time to listen and learn from others. And this young man, I'll just give a brief introduction. Terence Hayes. After spending 13 years in jail, he was able to come home with an electrical license and get a job within 3 days after his release. After losing 2 cousins to community-based violence and a 17-year-old cousin to police violence, Terence decided to use his skills and lived experiences to start a journey into criminal justice reform, restorative justice, and gun violence reduction. He sits on the Governor's Restorative Justice Commission. He is a chair of FITCOG, and I don't want to give you alphabet soup, but it's a community-based public safety and equity partner in the efforts to reduce gun violence. He sits on the Governor's Restorative Commission, and he is a chair of FITCOG, and he sits on Multnomah County DA Mike Schmidt's Community Members Justice Integrity Unit, where they review 819. Oh, you're gonna tell me about it. Okay, I don't want to read it anymore. Okay. He also, I'll just a bit of this. He's the owner of Restore Nuisance Abatement and focuses on hiring formerly incarcerated men and women, in which he describes as restorative justice at work. And finally, Terence is a candidate for Portland City Council representing District 1. Please welcome Brother Terence Hayes. Oh, you can jump, and that's when you're young, you can just jump up. You don't.
Now we know
stand.
he's young.
Welcome, Terence.
Hello, how y'all doing? My resume still ain't big as yours, Mike, so I got some work to do, y'all. How you doing?
I'm good, and I'd just like to just appreciate your perspective
Okay.
and your lens, and a question or two from Mike.
Thank you for that amazing introduction. I was really blessed that after doing time, and there's some folks in here I did time with, Ray Fox, was able to build some amazing relationships during my incarceration. But I do love the fact that when I came home, Senate Bill 819 was available. And in Multnomah County, I was the first person to receive that. So with all the beautiful years I did incarcerated, I don't have to check that box anymore. So when we talk about restorative justice and reform and all those type of things, I would love to look at my life and say that if this thing is done right, Mike, then we can transition folks back into their community in a very healthy and meaningful way. So I'm excited about what that looks like. I'm ready to wrestle with you a little bit up here about ODLC, because I have lived experience, and I love your heart about it, Mike, and I'm really grateful to be here so we could talk a little bit about it from my perspective and then what you're trying to accomplish along the way.
And you had a question?
Yeah, I get the first question. I think folks who've been incarcerated can appreciate this question. When we talk about humanizing folks in ODLC, what I noticed is Portland is kind of moving in a direction where when we look at police accountability, we want that to be community-based. We look at, because we recognize that when you try to get folks to police themselves, it doesn't always perfectly work out. But if we can bring the community in, it could be some balance. And so one of the things I think folks who've been incarcerated, and y'all forgive me if I don't use perfectly politically correct terms, I did a lot of time in jail, and that didn't exist at that time. Adults in custody was just inmates. So I'm trying to work through the language, so y'all forgive me. Don't hold it against me when y'all see me on the ballot next year. Don't throw me under the bus. But this year, right? Thank you. I am getting old. You talking about I'm young because I took that step. I'm really excited. So what I was curious about, Mike, is one of the things I found really interesting during my incarceration is when it came to the grievance process. That thing is handled internally. And what folks like myself always struggle with is that, talk about phones. What we always struggle with was that we always felt like when we had grievances or concerns that the individuals that would look over those and consider their whether or not they was good or not was the friends and family of officers, right? And this is not, I want to be really clear. I'm bringing my lived experience so that we can do this thing right in a healthy way, not in any type of anti-correctional officers. I feel like there's men and women that work their tail off every day and do the right thing. So I just want to make that the starting point for me. But I have experienced myself where I do grievances because of the way I was treated, and they were just dismissed. So I want to know if you would consider, with the temperature of our community now wanting to see oversight outside of internally, have you or will you consider maybe using an outside consultant firm or anything like that that will review those grievances, talk to adults in custody, and talk to staff? And I think, will you consider an outside consultant firm? And if so, is that possible? Because I know there's union things to consider. And have you considered? So let's just start there. And we're going to wrestle. So even though it's a question, expect us to go back and forth if Mike say something I don't like. Mike, wife, you got to forgive me. Put it to my heart, not my head, okay? All right, come on, Mike.
You know, I'm sure he says when he says wrestle, we're just talking verbal.
not physically.
Verbal
I'm the referee, so they're not gonna cross this line, okay?
Antoinette's going to have to help me out. The internal discipline process of the hearings, when, adults in custody feel like they've been mistreated or they have had a rule violation or policy violation, then they get disciplined, and that's a loss of privileges, or it could mean time out of their housing unit or something of that nature. So those go to a hearings officer, and in the past, that was often, as Terence said, a friend, somebody that was inside the corrections officer system, temporarily assigned as a hearings officer, or doing that work.
Right.
That has changed
Okay.
for the better. Now the hearings officers are part of a separate system, but the perception is still there that it's part and parcel of the same thing. And I like your idea of having outside oversight or somebody else providing a lens to the community, the adults in custody and the corrections officers,
sure.
that this system is fair and impartial. So I'd be interested in talking to you, especially if you don't get elected, which I'm sure you will. But if you don't, and you're looking for employment opportunities, that may
Come on
be
now, huh?
that may be a near area where somebody with lived experience could help us design a better, more fair, impartial system as we move forward. We've taken some steps, but I don't think that we're necessarily communicating that well to the community, whether it's the community of the adults in custody or to their family and friends who also hear about these discipline processes and grievances. So I'd be interested in working with you and figuring out how do we make that the perception as well as the reality fair and impartial.
I'm going to hold you to that, Mike. I'm going to hold you to that. We'll have to
Okay.
talk about it later. But you said something interesting. When we talk about lived experience, I noticed, and I hope you can correct me here. I'm not looking to catch you, Mike. I'm looking for ODLC to be amazing because our family and our friends are in that situation. What's your thought about, because I always feel like that folks like myself who have lived experience but has got out and did the things they're supposed to do, we're always, even when we're trying to get back into ODLC with programs and thoughts and ways that we know actually work. Because if you haven't really gone through this, all you can do is try to listen to folks who ain't went through it, who was taught by folks who ain't went through it, about how you stay successful. I took every program during that time, right? Those were not necessarily the things that helped me become successful. It was work, it was family support, it was unique opportunities, and it was a body of work I had to put together myself when I was incarcerated. I am not a system leaner. I believe that folks have to be ready to go through the process themselves in order not to get out and keep committing crimes. But I do wonder, like, how do we get folks like myself back into the process? How do you create something, Mike, where somebody is conscious of folks that can look at the body of work folks have done once they come home and give them a shot to come in, start programs, and be a part of folks having healthier processes back into the system?
Yeah, I think you've brought up one of the areas where I hope I can be of assistance to adults in custody and former adults in custody and their family and friends, and to our correction system, because I really believe in this idea of peer mentors, and that when you have people with lived experience that have been successful in whether it's maybe substance use disorders or mental health or in just life's challenges, when you have people that have that lived experience and they're helping with the programs, we're going to have better outcomes. So count me in. We got to figure out how to do that.
Right.
Peer mentors is an area where we're right now at DOC, at the Department of Corrections, looking at how do we do that with our substance use disorder programming and treatment, because certainly what we've seen in the criminal justice system and in our community is that peer mentors are just so valuable in helping people be successful, breaking that cycle of addiction.
And they underpaid, Mike.
Yes.
They underpaid. You got to make sure that you put that money on that table when you bringing folks in, because I'm telling you, folks with lived experience is often not compensated for the risk that's associated with the work. So I would encourage you to put the bag on the table, Mike, as we say. And I'm telling you, folks, folks will come and show up because folks like myself, Ray Fox, we want to be there. We want to be involved. We want to work here. We want to shake your hand and be a part of it. But I do think and know for a fact that you got some work ahead of you, because there is still a culture of how you perceive, how ODOC employees perceive folks that's been there because of the nature of those relationships. So I love that you're breaking it down good, Mike, but you got work, man. And I'm really curious to watch you put forth that effort, because I am skeptical that folks are going to easily buy into what you're trying to do. On our side of this process, it is tough to not be the inmate. I love that we using better language, but when you talked about, you said, I went in and it was nice and it wasn't as well, when the big boss show up, Mike, it's always less tension on the table, right?
Sure.
It's always folks that's going to behave better because the big boss, and they watch you and they know that what your expectations is. You got to find like some surprise visits, or you got to find a way, Mike, to show up in a way. And even when you're talking about meeting with adults in custody, you got to find a way to isolated conversations, because we have natural fears in those scenarios where you have a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain that's walking the big boss around and you're being very genuine. When you leave there, I'm stuck there, right? So we have to find methods, and talking about outside consultants, talk about access to adults in custody when those consultants is coming in. It's not, Mike, just about grievances, but about humanizing, right? You have to consider that the humanization can't always come from folks that sit there. It has to be somebody outside that'll report honestly back to you and can have access, one, to not just inmates, but staff inmates, Lord forgive me, adults in custody. I told y'all, I'm trying to work through it. Y'all don't get me. Adults in custody and staff. Because as much as I am concerned with the safety of adults in custody, we have seen staff members get hurt. We've seen them assaulted, especially staff members talking about the grievance process that continue to poke and pry and dehumanize adults in custody. And there always seem to not be an answer for those staff members. Maybe union, there could be some other stuff there, Mike. But I really love the thought of all those issues: humanization, grievance processes, right? Finding a way to the adults in custody and even staff to have private, intimate conversations. And that's really tough when you walk into a facility to get all the officers to step away. But Mike, that has to be the type of energy you bring, brother. If you're really gonna get folks like myself to be honest with you without fear of being retaliated against, you're gonna have those conversations and be able to do the work separate from the normal processes.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I
for
appreciate
that.
that insight. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you to kind of follow up with that. And having those conversations and building that trust and relationships, how often do you plan to meet with
Adults in custody.
adults in custody? And have you talked to anyone currently being held in an isolation cell in your prisons?
Yeah, I've been to 7 of our institutions in the 7 weeks that I've been with the Department of Corrections. I plan on visiting all of the facilities by the end of this month, except for Lakeview, which is in the winter, not an easy commute.
Right.
It's in Lake County, so it's a long ways from the Portland area, and it's hard, it's very isolated. So I'm trying to get to all of the institutions, and at every single facility I go into, I meet with the adults in custody, and I tour every housing unit or type of housing unit in there, talk to the line staff, the adults in custody, go to the work areas, and really try and have those honest dialogues. I get the, I am, wearing a suit, so I look out of place, but I'm trying to have those conversations. And I think having them with people with lived experience like you outside, you can be honest and open, and we've had a couple conversations already about it. I think that's another way for me to learn more about that lived experience and how I can be of help as this new position takes hold of me, and to really find a way to be of service to the adults in custody and to our staff.
What's been your biggest challenge thus far? Like, whoa, your biggest challenge that you see ahead?
Well, the woe was hearing that it's a $2.3 billion biennial
Yeah, I was
budget. So,
impressed with that too. It's a lot of
man,
money.
that is a lot of money. And it's, running these institutions is, it's challenging. I mean, there's 12 little cities where we provide everything that the adults in custody need to live there. And it's expensive, and we need to find ways to be as efficient as possible while also providing the very best services and looking upstream. So how do we reduce the population coming into our facilities? I mean, as a community, looking upstream to reduce the number of people being incarcerated in Oregon.
And with that budget,
That's a lot
that's
of
a big
budget.
whoa.
Yeah.
What, can you kind of share some of the rehabilitation systems that are in place and how you might improve upon them in terms of to reduce recidivism, but also when folks are out, how much time do you support them? I think often in programs, we release you, we give you a bus ticket, and bye-bye you. What do you see as a way of
Yeah,
developing
I
more?
think you have to do a warm handoff to community corrections, who's responsible for the supervision of folks that leave our custody. Most people remain on some sort of supervision for a period of time after they leave the Department of Corrections. And we want to make sure we do a warm handoff, provide in-reach if possible for the parole officer to come into our institutions, meet with their client, and establish a relationship. So we're really keen on doing that. But in terms of programs, I want to ask you about, you're a journeyman electrician.
Yes, I am.
And you
Well,
got
I
your-
was. But yes, I was.
So you got that while you were
Yep, I
at
got it at
DOC.
Snake River. So during that time, nothing like that existed. And then when Snake River implemented, I think Snake was the first place that brought in the planned electrician journeyman program. And I was one of, I think, 3 or 4 people that got into that program and graduated from them. And it changed my life, just to be 100. The trades are essential, I believe, to when folks come home, not to go back to jail. Mike, I think that a lot of people already have those skill sets and talents, and it just needs to be connected to the ability to feed their families. I do think that there's programs inside, there's jobs and stuff inside of DOC, folks working with their hands, but it don't turn into certifications. It don't turn into licensing. So if we can find a method to transfer even those plant jobs or those carpentry jobs, building things within DOC, if we turn those into certifications, working with the unions, working with apprenticeship programs, just that alone, I think it'd be impactful. It changed my life. When you can come home after that many years and provide a living wage for your family and get your butt kicked for 8 to 10 hours a day, when the day over, you don't have time for the nonsense. And I think that's the part we often miss, is that idle hands will tear you up every time. So even when I'm hiring folks, one of the things I say is, I'm gonna work you, right? I'm gonna work you and I'm gonna pay you really well. And so that I've been really blessed in that the folks that have worked for me, 12 people that I hired, none of them have caught new charges, right? Because I work them, we connect that with mentorship and relationship, and I just stay on them, Mike, because I love them, I care about them. And so for me, that was the first step for me to even love and fall in love with the trades, because as a Black man, I didn't believe I can be an electrician. I didn't come for generations of electricians. And then when we talked about the electrical space, it was always the math, it's tough. And when you hear that as especially a young Black man, it's discouraging, because I didn't watch my father, who might have just been an average dude, but can work his tail off. I didn't watch him have success in the trade. So I didn't believe I could. But when I seen some other folks that I know wasn't that much brighter than me, right? If we're just there together, but was grinding and working and in the trades, I started believing that I could have success there. And I did, and I was really blessed. So if we can get them trades, implemented in there, and we can start finding ways to work with the unions and apprenticeships to get folks licensed and journeyed out, or at least close enough to it where they can provide a living wage and provide for their family, it'll change things, Mike. I can assure you, especially when you talk about Snake River, which is the biggest prison out here, that it changed my life. And you'll rarely hear me say, oh, DOC put something on the table that changed my life. But brother, that trade changed my life. And those are the type of things I'm saying has to be part of the narrative when we're talking about recidivism.
Yeah, that's one of the
Yeah.
things that I've noticed when I walk into the facilities, is that we have job opportunities like electricians, like plumbers, like welders, like carpenters. We're building furniture, we're manufacturing garments, we're doing call centers.
Yep.
So a lot of it is skills that are, they come with a certification when you complete a journeyman program. So I'm super excited about those things, but some of it is just basic jobs, skills, teaching people how to get up and go to work, and to work as part of a team, have a boss, be respectful in that environment. And those are skills that then you can take into what is right now a great employment market. And we're walking our walk and talking our talk at DOC, because we're hiring people with lived experience who were formerly incarcerated, and they're working at our headquarters and they're working in our communications team. And I'm really pleased to see that.
Right.
And can I share a success story that
Yeah.
you've hired lots of folks with that lived experience and coming from jail? There was one I want to share with you, a personal story. Terence hired a young man that had never worked a day in his life.
No.
He'd been in the streets, but he said, I want to change. And Terence gave him a chance. He changed. He is so excited to work. He got engaged, got married. Well, he invited you to the wedding.
I
He
was
was
there.
so excited that success stories. And again, what can happen when you invest in and believe in folks? And I want to go a little bit back to the humanizing. I love that. Specifically, how are you addressing safety issues for trans prisoners that respects their rights to basic privacy and dignity?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have in corrections and in public safety right now, is the trans community. It's relatively new for us with how we deal with people incarcerated, and to find ways to safely house people, to be respectful, to have appropriate medical staff that can help with counseling and gender affirming surgery. These are all new areas in corrections work, and I think Oregon is at the forefront of some of those practices, but we're not where we need to be yet. I met with Basic Rights Oregon a few days ago, and this was the topic of conversation. How do we do better with our trans community that's incarcerated in our institutions in Oregon? It's ongoing work. We're not where we should be. I think we have good policies in place, but not all of our, we don't have all of our facilities up to where they should be. For housing units, we don't necessarily have, in some respects, we don't have the staffing levels that we need to have the staff assigned to a facility, that the person, if we're doing searches or things like that, and they request a certain staff person, a gender appropriate staff person, we may not have that, so we have to work around that.
Thank you. And now I want to turn to questions from the audience. Very thoughtful, deep questions. Y'all smart. I had to do some research to even understand one of the questions that you asked, but one of them, what role do you see the community playing in transforming the correction system? The community, how can we?
You can, like I said, get upstream. So it's about education, it's about healthcare, it's about housing, it's about opportunities for people that look like Terrence.
Okay.
If we can be successful with the community of color, we can change this world. So the bottom line is we've got to get upstream before people get involved in the criminal justice system, and then look for diversion opportunities at every intersect in that criminal justice system to move people away from custody. When they come into the Department of Corrections, our job, our responsibility is keep them safe and secure, to provide them opportunities to be successful when they leave our custody. So that's my commitment to this piece to it. The community can help by giving people an opportunity when they leave custody for employment, because it is such a change for folks to have the opportunity to provide for their families, to have meaningful work. That's going to make this all worthwhile.
Yeah, I would say, just to add my personal experience to that, Mike, is the community has to change. We have to become really serious about how we see formerly incarcerated folks. I think we all talk about it. I think in our hearts we want it, but I think when it comes to once they talk about that, once we're in interviews, right? I don't have to check the box on the application, but once I'm in the interview, I'm still asked those questions. We have to find a way as a community, especially in Portland, to buy out of that narrative that somehow you have the inability to be an excellent employee because of your past. I find that formerly incarcerated folks grind harder than anybody else. When you give them an opportunity, they show up. Now, there will be moments of time where that trauma pre and post incarceration will show up. That's when we love. That's when we have compassion. That's when we work with folks that have specialty in those spaces. But if I would love to see us press our employers, press the Nikes and the Intels and the colleges and all these folks to buy into the narrative that folks who come home can be amazing when they come home. And I don't put that on you and ODOC, Mike. I think y'all have to prepare them, but the community have to embrace them and love them. And if we can do that, I promise you our recidivism rates will plummet.
Sounds like collective care.
Yeah.
This is a great question as well. My mother is bedbound and unaware of who she is or her surroundings due to Alzheimer's. Do you have prisoners in your custody in a similar situation? And could they be cared for elsewhere at this point? This could be a more humane and less expensive option as our prison population ages.
So I want to share another story with you about, my first couple weeks in this new position. I walked into the Oregon State Penitentiary, which was built in the 1800s, and 4 tiers of cells. It looks a lot like Alcatraz if you've been to a trip there. And the bottom tier, every cell, there's 40 cells, every cell had a walker or a wheelchair out in front of it. It was shocking to me. We have about 1,500 people in custody right now out of that 12,000 that are over the age of 61. We have a lot of aging adults in our custody in aging facilities that were never designed to house and safely manage them. So those are challenges for us, challenges for our legislature and for the governor's office to address. But we've got aging facilities and an aging population, and it's not going to change. The population in custody, many of them are there for serious crimes that are going to require them to stay incarcerated maybe for the rest of their life. And we have a responsibility to house them in appropriate facilities that provide them safe, appropriate housing. And a facility built in the 1800s is not it.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. For several years, I was a project consultant for the prison ministry for the Catholic Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. One of the great hurdles I encountered was the cumbersome and daunting process for volunteers to obtain security badges, including clergy. Do you plan to address this issue?
Yeah, I think that came up from Terence. We've had a lot of security processes that are pretty cumbersome for people wanting to volunteer or even work in our system. And we're trying to find ways to maintain the safety of our facilities and our staff and the adults in custody, but open the door. We've got to have more in-reach from providers in our community, peer mentors, the faith community. We have students that come in to participate in classes from Oregon and University of Oregon and Portland State that actually come into our institutions. So we've got to find ways to have an easier process for us. So that's one of the things our executive team has already talked about. We're taking some early steps with the students because they're only there for a short period of time, a term, and then they're moving on to something else. We don't want to spend, countless days or weeks getting them through this cumbersome process, onboarding them with all this training that they have to take, and then they're only going to go to classes for a term and then they're moving on. We've got to find ways to do that faster. And then we can take the lessons we learned from that and apply them to peer mentors and other people that want to volunteer or work in our facilities.
I do want to comment on that because I don't want people to misread it. It is important that there is safety measures when it comes to folks coming in. It has to be there for a lot of different reasons, Mike. So it's not that I don't value that. I think that you hit on it is how do we get the process going in a meaningful way? Fast. I don't want to say fast, but in an efficient way. How do you become efficient in that? Is it staffing up? And that's not a question. I'm just talking. Okay. Is it staffing up? Is it criteria changes? Is it, what are some different ways? I would love for you to think and your executive staff think about different ways to also be very welcoming, right? I would love to see you guys so overwhelmed with community volunteers that you got to keep hiring people. But that would also take for the community to feel like it's important to get involved. Because as you said earlier, those are our neighbors tomorrow. Folks is getting out every day. And we as a community should be really trying to be there to nurture, groom, and prepare them. Because it is no way you can spend years of your life in a box and come out the same or come out healthy, right? There is some mental stuff that we all have to go through when we come home, like cell phones. Like cell phones. So I hope we can get there, Mike, to really have a healthy, efficient process for folks that encourages folks to volunteer and be a part of it. Because how amazing would it be to be overwhelmed with community members that show up every day and care for people as they on their way home.
Thank you. One last question, and then I'm going to, depend on how much time you take to answer it, you can have a closing, and you might get a closing. The last question, please comment on whether the Lane County program that includes neurofeedback services and reentry support has met or exceeded expectations.
That is a very good question, and I don't have an answer for it because I don't know about that Lane County program yet. I did visit the Lane County Sponsors Program. It's housing down in Lane County that is absolutely remarkable. It's a nonprofit that runs housing for people coming out of custody, and they are doing a fabulous job. I asked the executive director, can you replicate this in other counties for us? And he said, no. We'll model it for you. We're doing our best here in Lane County, But if Multnomah County or Washington or Clackamas want to do this, we'll show them how, but we're not going to do the work for them because it is challenging work. But the sponsors program, I just want to give them a shout out. I was so impressed with the work they're doing in Lane County.
Oh.
Mike, do you guys have funding to support that type of work?
What
Uh,
budget, what budget you got? What you talking about? Do you have funding?
Not without going to our legislature and asking for that. That would really be, they work very closely with community corrections in Lane County. So the community corrections office is literally across the street. And when we release people from DOC to Lane County, they often go, if they don't have stable housing with family or friends, they go to the sponsors program and they stay there indefinitely until they have a stable placement in the community.
So that's a different set of money.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Can I ask Terrence a question?
Closing remarks. I see that we're going to have some networking
Yeah.
and to come back. And I really appreciate, you don't have to know all the answers. You
Yeah.
get an invitation to come back and get the answers.
Yeah.
And you can ask
Terrence,
thank you. You can ask Terrence a closing question
Perfect.
after the mic is closed. And we want to thank you. Is it going to take long?
No, come on.
I was just wanted to ask him,
I've been having him the whole time. Let him get some
Okay,
gifts.
go for
Come
it,
on,
go for
Mike.
if you were the DOC director,
Ooh,
what would
wait.
your top priority be? One thing.
You said on that one, Mike. That was real. That was real good. I think it would go back to my original statement. I think my priority would be bringing outside consultation in to review what was happening and then give recommendations to me so that I can make changes based on what they see from both perspectives, both staff and adults in custody. I think I would just immediately put money there, Mike, because I know that we have to have a voice that sits on the outside of those 12 small cities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Club. Thank you all. Zoom is cool, but I like seeing, I feel your energy. So keep coming back to City Club in person, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.